Well, it's interesting. When the government sues you and loses, there actually are provisions that allow you to go back to the court to make a claim for those fees and costs. But here's the thing about that.
This episode is brought to you by Propy, which is leading the charge in putting real estate on chain. Propy is a game changer. You can buy and sell real estate with cryptocurrencies using the Propy platform, which is powered by a blockchain, of course, and they have a native token called Pro. And I've been an investor in the Propy token since 2018. So Propy is a licensed Web3 pioneer operating since 2017. They have facilitated over $4 billion in transactions. They're putting titles and deeds on chain. They use Coinbase for their crypto escrow service. So this is a great platform. And once again, they are ahead of the curve when it comes to putting real estate on chain. And they just launched a great campaign where you can earn some of the Propy tokens. And it's simply by doing tasks such as sharing their vision video, signing up and inviting a friend, and much more. So if you'd like to learn more about Propy, visit the link in the description. Hey, everybody, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and my guest today is Paul Grewal, who's the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at Coinbase. Paul, great to see you.
Great to see you, Tony. Thanks for having me back.
Paul, I had to have you on because we got very big news coming out from the SEC, and that is they are dismissing the case against Coinbase. And I would love to get your thoughts and break down what this means for the company and your plans moving forward. So let's talk about first reactions. How are you and the folks feeling about this?
Well, my first reaction, Tony, was it's about time. You know that we have been embroiled in lawsuits and endless litigation with the SEC now going on a couple of years. And, when we were first served with the Wells notice, which was the formal process that initiated the SEC's lawsuit against Coinbase, we knew we were in for a tough fight. And we knew this might take not just months or even a year, but potentially many years. But we also knew that we were right on the facts, we were right in the law, and that if we just hung in there, fought hard, eventually, the truth would win out. And we were prepared for that truth to come out in the form of a Court of Appeals decision or even a decision by the US Supreme Court. We're thrilled that with new leadership at the SEC, that truth is really presented in the form of a dismissal that the SEC has agreed to. So could not be more excited about that.
And Paul, I found really ridiculous, especially in the case against Coinbase. The SEC knew your business model, what you do, everything, green lighted you to go public, and then come back and sue you about your business model. That is
a little bit of history is helpful to bear in mind. Coinbase became a public company in April of 2021. And anybody who knows anything about that process knows full well that the SEC doesn't just ask a couple of questions before allowing that to happen. They stick a probe into literally every corner of your business, as they should. It's important that public market investors have a certain amount of confidence that a company listing on a national exchange has, qualified in certain ways for that privilege. But after going through that months-long exercise where they literally turned over every rock in the company to understand how we worked, what our business really consisted of, what criteria we applied for listing digital assets on our exchange, they allowed us to move forward and ultimately deemed that it was in the public interest to let us list on an accelerated basis. So, for that to happen in April of 21, and then for the then new SEC chair, Gary Gensler, to testify before Congress a few weeks later that there weren't any authorities that applied to cryptocurrency platforms like ours, and that it was really up to Congress to act, for us to only later find ourselves on the receiving end of, as I said, a Wells notice, a threat of litigation, and then ultimately a lawsuit was beyond the pale. I'll be charitable and say it was beyond the pale.
So, Paul, with regards to the legal fees you guys spent, and I think it was $50 million or more?
Yeah, we disclosed last week when we announced that we had resolved this matter with the SEC that we had spent $50 million or more, and that figure is actually at a super conservative estimate. That's our best estimate of the dollars we spent on the outside lawyers and the advisors that you have to hire in a high-profile case like this one alone. What it doesn't capture, Tony, are any of the dollars we had to spend on the many, many people inside the company who worked on this case day after day.
Mm.
And of course, most importantly, the opportunity costs, all of the lost innovation, all of the quiet tax that the SEC imposed on the company as we were distracted and taken away from our mission of bringing cryptocurrency to a billion or more people. It's a staggering sum of money, no matter how you add it all up. And we just thought it was important to put into context for people who don't do this for a living or pay attention day to day, just how outrageous these costs really were.
Is there any way you can recoup those fees from the federal government or the SEC? I don't know if there's some sort of infrastructure set up for things like this.
Well, it's interesting. When the government sues you and loses, there actually are provisions that allow you to go back to the court to make a claim for those fees and costs. But here's the thing about that, Tony. There are all sorts of strict standards that apply, overly strict standards, in my view, that limit, for example, the percentage of those fees that can be awarded. The court has to decide whether there was a substantial basis for the claim. What all that translates to, if you can believe it, is spending more dollars on litigation in order to claim dollars you've already spent on litigation. And so round and round you go. It's not a terribly effective process. And what it means is that even in a perfect world, you are left holding a very big bag and left to go about your business with that cost hanging over your head.
Now, I know I love the United States. I love the Constitution and everything. I know our
We all
government
do.
is perfect, but I find that as a big loophole or just craziness, because how can the government go after you? They lose, and you could be out of business if you didn't have the funds to fight them.
Think about it, Tony. Coinbase is blessed in a lot of different ways. And as the chief legal officer, I am especially blessed to represent this company every day. But one of the most important ways in which we are blessed is we have a large balance sheet. We have billions of dollars at our disposal if required in order to defend ourselves against meritless cases. How many other companies can say that? How many individuals can say that when they receive a Wells notice or even a subpoena or some formal request for documents or information that has no basis in law or fact? It's a tremendous power the government exercises over companies and individuals in these situations. And I want to be clear, many government actors exercise that power appropriately and responsibly,
Right.
but many do not. And I think in this case, all across crypto, we've seen what can happen when one rogue regulator can just decide to translate or turn his ideology into action. And that's what we saw with Gary Gensler over the last 4 years.
And obviously Gary Gensler did his thing over the past 4 years. It was intense regulation by enforcement, but we're seeing a complete 180 now. Hester Peirce, Mark Ueda, the acting chair, they launched a crypto task force. They're dropping a lot of cases, obviously against Coinbase, but also Uniswap, OpenSea, Robinhood, Gemini. And this morning we heard about Consensus. What are your thoughts on that 180 and how things are moving now?
Well, I give acting chair Mark Ueda and Commissioner Hester Peirce a ton of credit because even though for a long time, each of them have been loud, public, and committed to calling out the excesses of the prior leadership under Gary Gensler, it's never easy. It's never easy leading an institution to turn a corner and take a different direction. And yet, in this case, as they await, the arrival of the permanent chair, Paul Atkins, that we all expect to be confirmed by the Senate in short order, they decided not only to turn that corner, but not to wait. And I just really applaud not only their commitment to a different course for crypto, rulemaking, for example, rather than lawsuits, open dialogue and conversation rather than threats and intimidation, a public record. I mean, basic stuff of who's meeting with the task force and when. That commitment, I think, says a lot. And it's equally impressive to me that they didn't wait. They didn't say, you know what, the permanent boss is coming. We'll leave this to him to implement. They understood that every single day of injustice is a further injustice, and so they wanted to stop it as quickly as they could.
Absolutely. And I love that transparency. It's almost like, this is, well, I shouldn't say it's almost, it is what they should have been doing the whole time. This whole thing is
Absolutely.
powered by our tax dollars. They work for us.
They
And
do.
the transparency should have been there long ago.
I'm so glad, Tony. I have to just say that you framed it so well. It bears underscoring. These are your tax dollars, my tax dollars, everyone's tax dollars that were wasted on 4 years of nonsensical litigation. So it's not just that there was a series of poor decisions made, although that's absolutely true. They literally spent our money on what? I think it's important that be made very, very clear.
Absolutely. So I would love to get your thoughts and perspective, and maybe not just yours, but the entire company. What does this mean to have this dark cloud lifted and not have to worry and look over your shoulder for regulation by enforcement?
Well, what it means first and foremost is that we can take all of those lawyers, all of those advisors, all of those millions of dollars and put them to a much more productive use. Brian Armstrong, our CEO, has always been clear. He was prepared to spend whatever it takes and to do whatever it takes to stand up for what was right. But Brian has also been very clear that he didn't get into crypto. He didn't start the company in order to fund litigation and over years or perhaps even decades. We're trying to build, a platform that will bring a billion or more people into crypto. And so, with this piece comes an opportunity to refocus and redouble our efforts in that way. Now, there still is a ton of work that remains on the policy front. First and foremost, Tony, we need legislation in this country. It's long past due that we have sensible rules for a market structure, for stable coins, for other elements of crypto that will allow companies like Coinbase, but also, the next great startup with, two friends in a garage and a laptop and a dream to do what Gary always said he wanted everyone to do, but never provided a path for, which is to come in and register. That's critically important. You mentioned the task force. I again cannot say enough good things about Commissioner Peirce's commitment and energy to getting rulemaking going. The task force is already working hard at a process for sensible rules for crypto, so that those transactions that really do fall within the federal securities laws can be properly overseen and managed appropriately. So legislation, critically important. Rulemaking, critically important. And if we get all that right, we set ourselves up collectively for, I think, much greater success in building great products and services based on digital assets and fulfilling, I think the dream of that so many of us have had now for so many years.
Yeah, absolutely. On the note of legislation, we obviously have a pro-crypto president, the most pro-crypto Congress, a new SEC chair, new CFTC chair coming in, both who are pro-crypto, Secretary of Treasury who's pro-crypto. We have a White House crypto czar. Do you think, or do you anticipate that we're going to see stablecoin and market structure legislation pass this year?
I do. And by the way, don't forget the Secretary of Commerce. I mean, all across the administration, you have people who understand these issues deeply and are committed to charting the right course here and striking the right balance between protecting innovators and promoting innovation on the one hand, and also protecting investors who unfortunately can and at times can be taken advantage of. I think legislation is going to happen, and it is going to happen this year. And that's not just my hope and and perhaps my naivete. It reflects the fact that the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Tim Scott, has said explicitly, publicly, that we're going to see legislation inside of 100 days. You've now seen each of the four committees across the House and the Senate that are going to play a significant role with respect to legislation working together through a joint task force.
Yeah.
To get to sensible rules. You have legislation introduced on market structure and stablecoins in both the House and the Senate in ways that we think can be reconciled and are fundamentally all aligned in terms of the right balance to strike, as I said, between innovation and protecting investors. So all of that tells me that we're going to see progress this year. We're going to have something available for the most pro-crypto president to sign. this year. And I think the rest of the world is going to see a very different look from America in 2025. Gone are the days of us staring at the floor and staring at our shoes and wondering, whether we would ever see sensible rules. America's going to lead again on crypto, and I think it's a good thing for everyone all across the world.
For sure. And do you expect like more companies to come back to the US, more capital to come back to the US, and even more entrepreneurs to say, you know what, I want to expand to US. Before I was geofencing because I don't want to get in trouble or get a Wells notice, but they will now open up their services to the US.
I do, and it's interesting, Tony. Over the course of the Gensler regime and the campaign against crypto, not fraud in crypto, not abuse in crypto, but just crypto, period.
Mhm.
We saw something like 20% or more of software developers working on crypto projects here in the United States pack up their bags and take their talents elsewhere, moving outside the United States for the very reason you suggest, to avoid that overhang of irrational enforcement. It's already hard enough to, by the way, build great products and services, stuff that people want and that meet a real need, but to try to do so, feeling like any day that you open up your laptop, you could be receiving a subpoena, it just isn't tenable. The other data that gives me great hope and confidence that we're going to see a return to the United States as the crypto capital of the world, as President Trump has put it, is that if you look at data, for example, from Electric Capital that puts out this incredible developer activity report every year, you're starting to see indications in public repositories through pull requests and GitHub repos and all of that the U.S. is slowly but surely asserting itself as the center of dev activity. And so, yes, there's lots of good reason for hope, lots of reasons to be optimistic, but it's up to Congress to act. It's critically important that they pass the legislation so that we fulfill this potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that people have been talking about, in addition to market structure and stablecoin legislation, is a Bitcoin reserve.
Yes.
There's geopolitical layers to this, as we try to back up the US dollar as the world reserve currency, and obviously continue to try to put a stockpile of hard assets, whether it be gold, Bitcoin, digital assets. Do you think we might see a Bitcoin reserve bill pass this year?
I don't know whether that will pass this year, but I'm very confident a version of it will pass in the first half of the Trump administration. Look, I think Senator Lummis, within days or maybe hours of the new administration taking office and the new term in the Senate beginning, introduced her bill for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I think there have been, discussions and considerations of whether it ought to be structured as a reserve or as a stockpile, whether to include other digital assets or to focus on Bitcoin alone. I think we can work through all of those issues relatively quickly, but the logic and the case for it is clear. Digital assets, including Bitcoin, are here to stay, and it's important that the United States put down a marker that this country is no longer going to allow technologies to flourish outside the United States that in many cases were first invented or certainly developed here in the United States. I think the other thing to bear in mind, Tony, that doesn't often get as much attention outside of conversations like this one, is that many U.S. states are also moving to develop their own digital asset or even specifically Bitcoin reserves in order to align with the president's vision of the U.S. leading the world in this important technology. So I just think at the federal level, at the state level, we're seeing tremendous progress on this. And while there are important details to work out, I think we're going to work them out without too much trouble once we're able to get the main legislation on market structure and stablecoins passed.
For sure. And then, we heard just, I think yesterday, Bank of America's CEO is making statements. They want to launch a stable coin once stablecoin legislation is passed. And we saw the SEC SOB 121 was repealed, which prevented the banks from being able to participate. Are you anticipating these banks are going to jump into crypto, start launching their own services and much more?
No question. Traditional financial institutions, including the banks, have long expressed an interest in digital assets and in crypto. In fact, in many cases, when they tried to provide basic support services to cryptocurrency firms, they were thwarted under the previous administration at the FDIC. It's an issue that has taken, I think, on even greater significance as we have exposed the campaign to choke off that support, something that many people refer to as Operation Choke Point 2.0, thanks to the great work of Nick Carter and others. But I think in 2025, and with this new administration and the most pro-crypto Congress elected, banks like B of A, but many others are quite, understandably saying this is an important asset class for America. We want to support it. We want to provide services to it, and so we welcome that. Coinbase partners with many of these institutions. In other areas, we compete with them, but this is a case where I think a rising tide will lift everyone's boat, and I think that's what you're going to see over the course of the next year.
I was going to ask you about that. You mentioned Coinbase works with some of these institutions. Many of them won't be able to do what Coinbase is doing right off the bat, but maybe Coinbase can help power what they're trying to do.
Absolutely.
Behind the scenes.
We've seen, I think that model work very well in the case of ETFs. When the trickle of ETFs became a flood over the course of last year, Coinbase was privileged enough to earn the right to provide custodial services and to many of those issuers, and also give them advice and counsel about how to think about the regulatory environment that lay ahead. They were only able to do that, by the way, after Grayscale took their case to the DC Circuit, and the SEC was found to have acted arbitrarily and capriciously in denying that application. So, I think that time and time again we've seen that when people are willing to stand up to rogue regulators like the SEC under Gary Gensler, the courts can and will step in. And once the courts do their job, I think many banks and other traditional financial institutions that have perhaps a more conservative view of these things get comfortable and then get excited about working with crypto. And certainly Coinbase is eager to help them where we can. And as I said, if we have to compete in other areas, that's fine too. Either way, you're going to just see more and more Americans function with crypto as part of the daily lives, even where they may not even realize it.
You mentioned the ETFs, and we've seen explosive growth. I mean, the Bitcoin ETF is breaking all the records, blowing every record out of the water. And then you've got an ETH ETF. Everybody's waiting for staking for that. But then there's a bunch of people filing for Litecoin, XRP, Solana ETFs. With the change in the SEC, do you anticipate those altcoin ETFs may get approved this year as well?
I do think we're going to see many more ETFs approved over the course of the year. Each application, of course, will be considered on its own merits. But the reason why I'm confident that we're just going to see digital asset-based ETFs become part of the fabric of our system of long-term financial investments is that the SEC tried, but they failed to stop this cold. And the courts made it clear that the SEC, like every other government agency, has to follow the law. And so once you take away these sort of blunt instruments that people like Gary Gensler like to rely upon, as opposed to thoughtful, nuanced, measured analysis, I think many of these projects will stand up quite well. They'll get approved, and it'll be left to the market to decide whether or not they're successful or not.
With regards to the legislation, and this may be getting too much into the weeds, we'll probably have to wait and see, but I'm curious, do you think the SEC will, with Congress, update the existing Howey test or create a whole new test for digital assets?
It's interesting, Tony, as someone who's thought a lot about the Howey test over now many years, I think I have a slightly different view than some others in our industry. The Howey test itself, I believe, is not going away. It will continue to apply to a particular type of investment contract that meets a particular standard, as the courts have begun to articulate, and that I think will remain relevant even with new legislation. But the beauty of legislation is Congress has a chance to rewrite the law entirely so that courts can adopt a new test. I don't know whether it will be orange groves in the future or some other kind of asset at the heart of a dispute that makes its way into court. But I think the fundamental idea that only those assets and asset transactions that fall outside the scope of Howey can list in the U.S. is going to be wiped away. There will be, for whatever reason, a handful of projects, I think, or maybe even more than a handful, that will in fact continue to qualify as securities and therefore be subject to the investment contract analysis that Howey provides. But many more, I think, are going to be able to leverage new forms and new standards that are going to be included in a market structure bill, and therefore allow the vast majority of our community and industry to get past these painful, endless debates about whether something's an investment of money. Is there a common enterprise? What does it mean for a control group to exercise efforts or make efforts in order to generate returns on those investments? All of those questions, I think, for the most part, are going to fade to black, and we can focus on the future and focus on how to build things that people want while keeping them safe.
For sure. I want to get your thoughts on meme coins. I wish I didn't have to ask you about this, but it's become such a prominent part of the market recently. I'm not a fan of meme coins, but I believe in the free market. If you want to go to the casino and gamble, you want to play the lottery, that's fine. But we've seen a lot of people are abusing this system and trying to take advantage and rug pulling people. And it's not necessarily the established meme coins like your Doge and your Pepe's and so forth, but the stuff that started last night or last week. How do you think the regulators and law enforcement are going to stop these people from doing these rug pulls?
Well, I think that it's understandable that regulators and in some cases law enforcement specifically would take an interest in these projects because, at least as has been publicly reported, in certain instances, it's pretty clear that what the promoters of these projects are engaged in is nothing short of garden variety fraud. But here's the thing, Tony, about that. We've had fraud statutes and anti-fraud laws on the books for centuries. There are all kinds of tools available to regulators, to law enforcement, including prosecutors and others, to address the abuses that are taking place and to create incentives for people to focus on building projects with real utility rather than simply just putting out random stuff and hoping the number goes up. So I can appreciate that people have legitimate concerns about certain projects and are always worried about investors being taken advantage of. I would just suggest to the regulators and to lawmakers that rather than spend a whole lot of time, energy, and more taxpayer money passing yet more laws that are duplicative, why not just take the laws that are on the books and say, don't rip people off, don't tell them one thing and do another, and go after the fraudsters?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm waiting to see which agency steps up. Maybe it's just simple law enforcement agencies that need to just be more aware of what's happening here and take action. But hopefully we don't, that gets slowed down.
It needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And Tony, you actually highlighted the most important line of defense, which are buyers themselves. People should ask themselves, what are they getting into when they decide to engage with some of these projects or perhaps buy a few tokens? And, if it's all fun and people look at it as entertainment, I suppose that's their choice. But we all have to be accountable and ultimately responsible for ourselves. And to the extent that the people are being misled or think facts are being misrepresented, that's something else altogether. And those can be addressed by the laws that I mentioned.
For sure. I wanted to ask you about the stable coins on Base, which is the Coinbase's layer 2 on Ethereum. I saw Brian Armstrong tweet out about this, that stable coins for Canada, Nigeria, and Brazil were recently launched on Base. Tell us about this, and are these pseudo CBDCs or actual stable coins? What are these?
Well, the projects that we're most excited about are projects issued privately that essentially allow for a digital version of the local fiat currency that just makes it faster, easier, and in many cases safer for people to conduct their daily business and ultimately conduct their daily lives. So, the fact of the matter is that dollar-backed stablecoins dominate global markets today, but there are unique local needs for local fiat currencies, and I think if early adoption and experience with some of these local fiat-backed current stablecoins can give local regulators greater confidence in the operation of these markets and a greater familiarity with what good oversight and regulation could look like. I think they can serve a tremendous value. That said, I do think that the real potential for stable coins in the short and maybe medium term lies with dollar-backed stable coins because, of course, unfortunately, in many parts of the world, people don't have access to dollars, and they need it because their local currencies are so devalued, and they're looking for alternatives so that their wages and their other efforts aren't frittered away through inflation.
Mm. So, with these stable coins, so let's say the Canadian one, right?
Sure.
Is it kind of like, is it pilots or is it like live stable coins that they're using maybe wholesale or retail? I don't know if they're using it in retail, but I don't know how much you can share there.
Well, what I think you'll see is that all over the world, you're seeing startups and new projects launch local fiat-backed stable coins, and their goal in many cases, not every case, but in many cases, is to simply allow for the efficient and cheap transfer of value within a particular local jurisdiction. And that can be for retail. That can be somebody looking for a way to pay for a telephone bill or buy a cup of coffee. It can be for institutions, including enterprises, corporations, companies that need to make payroll or pay for supplies from vendors and so forth. There are a whole host of and a range of use cases for these assets, but I don't know sitting here today whether any of them or all of them will succeed or succeed to the degree that Tether has succeeded or USDC has succeeded. But I do think that we want to encourage local experimentation and as you suggested a moment ago, allow markets to sort these things out when those markets are reasonably informed of relevant facts and people can make up their own minds. And that's what we're going to find out.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I mean, the direction we're all headed in is a more digital world. So if within your own country or jurisdiction, you're using the local fiat, but also want US dollars, why not have both? I can have the stablecoin version of my local fiat, but also USDC and things like that, right? And I can move it faster and cheaper and instantly and all that, all the
That's
benefits.
exactly right. I mean, so imagine, for example, if you are a foreign worker in a place like Dubai and you happen to come from a country like India, a very common scenario. That remittance corridor, by the way, is the largest in the world in terms of dollar volume. You could imagine a universe where a rupee-backed stablecoin would be of great interest to that worker looking to send money home to support family without paying a lot of high transaction fees and in a manner that allows the family back home to instantly use what they've received to buy groceries, to pay rent, or to do any of the other things day to day in local currency as opposed to having to go in and out of dollars. So I think, for Coinbase, the important thing to bear in mind is we don't pretend to have all the answers or know exactly what all the use cases will be. We view our role as empowering people to experiment, to try different ideas out and try different things. And over time, as I said, consumers ultimately will make those decisions for all of us.
For sure. All right, Paul. Final question here. We got to
Sure.
talk. We both love basketball. You
We
love the
do.
Cavs. The Cavs are looking really good this year, man. And then they added.
For an East Coast guy like you, Tony, to admit that means a lot to a Cleveland Cavaliers fan like me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll still be rooting for my Knicks, to take out the Cavs. But man, these Cavs look really dangerous. They're playing
Wrong.
amazing basketball. How far do you think they go?
Oh, I mean, I can't go so far as to predict a championship because that would jinx things, and I'm a superstitious man. But Eastern Conference Finals, Eastern Conference champions, no doubt. I think we could see an amazing 6 or 7 game series end in the Garden. How about that?
Mm, I think that'll be really good. I would love to see what the Knicks do against that front line and even that backcourt that the Cavs have.
Well, you may not be so thrilled to see my man Donovan Mitchell lift that trophy over his head, at center court in the Garden, but I think it could be a hell of a series, and I would love to see it.
The matchup between Boston would be interesting because you have Porzingis and a front line with Allen and Mobley. Uh,
Correct.
I'm very curious how that goes.
Correct. No, I think a lot of the country doesn't understand how good Evan Mobley is, and I mean Jared Allen is just such a joy to watch. I think we haven't seen a team this fun to watch, even if you're not a Cavaliers fan, since maybe the 2015 Warriors, maybe
Mm.
2016 Warriors. I'm going to make that call, but either way, I'm feeling very good about Cleveland, and I think we're going to see a great NBA playoffs. I really do.
Well, yeah, I really want to see the matchup with Boston. That's the one I'm bookmarking. The Cavs and Boston in the playoffs. Even though obviously I want my Knicks to go as far as possible, but I'm going to be
Well, I like
realistic.
our odds against the Knicks a little bit more, so maybe I'm not quite as excited to match up against Jalen Brown and the crew. But either way, I'm feeling very good about Cleveland's chances.
For sure. Paul, always great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Likewise, Tony. Great to talk to you.